It was a moment that will be etched into British political history for generations to come, an extraordinary declaration that sent shockwaves through Parliament and stunned the country to its very core. On what was expected to be a routine, uneventful day of political back and forth in the House of Commons, the Speaker stood solemnly, surveyed the silent chamber, and uttered words that no one had anticipated, nor thought possible: Nigel Farage, the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The atmosphere turned electric. The Commons, ordinarily filled with heckling and partisan bravado, froze in collective disbelief. On the opposition benches, Sir Keir Starmer, once revered as the man who could steer Labour back into power, sat paralysed, his face ashen, his hands trembling. In full view of the cameras, he appeared utterly broken, the weight of the moment collapsing upon him. It was political theatre of the highest order, except this time, the drama was real. Did you know that over 95% of our viewers aren't subscribed to the channel? We totally get it, life gets busy, and sometimes it's easy to forget. But here's the thing, subscribing is completely free, and it really helps us keep creating the content you enjoy. So, why not hit that subscribe button and join our community? It only takes a second, but it makes a world of difference to us. Thank you for your support. What had begun as just another predictable day in Westminster swiftly transformed into a seismic reckoning, a day when the established order crumbled before the eyes of the nation. The session had opened with the usual display of recycled talking points, worn-out platitudes, and scripted attacks from both sides of the aisle. But then, the mood shifted. Nigel Farage entered the chamber. Farage did not walk in like a guest at the periphery of power. He strode into the Commons as a man with purpose, as a political insurgent who had finally crossed the threshold of legitimacy. There was an eerie hush as he took his place. It was not the presence of a mere provocateur or populist fringe figure, it was the entrance of a man who, for better or worse, had come to seize his moment. His demeanor was unflinching, his movements precise. Clad in a sharp suit that seemed more ceremonial than conventional, he moved with the assuredness of someone who believed history was about to pivot in his favor. MPs on all sides, even the most hardened veterans, sensed it, something profound was unfolding. When Farage finally rose to speak, the transformation in the chamber was immediate. This was no ordinary address to Parliament. He was not merely speaking to MPs or party colleagues. His words were directed far beyond the green benches, they were aimed at the millions watching across living rooms, pubs, and offices up and down the country. His voice was firm, his tone deliberate. There was no hesitation, no preamble, no attempt at charm. From the outset, it was a full frontal political assault. Keir Starmer is not a leader, Farage declared, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. He is an illusion. Gasps rippled across the chamber. For a brief second, even the most jaded observers appeared stunned. And then it began, a methodical, relentless deconstruction of Starmer's leadership. Farage proceeded to dismantle the Labour leader's record with brutal precision. Policy by policy, promise by promise, he laid bare what he portrayed as a legacy of abandonment and betrayal. Starmer, he said, had forsaken the very working-class voters Labour was once built to serve, trading in their concerns for the approval of elite technocrats in London and Brussels. You delivered nothing, he declared with contempt. Absolutely nothing. Bugger all. The phrase exploded across social media, repeated by political commentators and ordinary citizens alike. Starmer, usually the picture of measured restraint, could no longer maintain his composure. The carefully cultivated image of control began to fracture. He fumbled with his notes, avoided eye contact, and blinked rapidly as if trying to remain grounded. The transformation was visible. The leader of the opposition, once seen as the unflappable grown-up in the room, looked lost and exposed. Farage was far from finished. He turned next to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, and launched a scathing critique of her economic stewardship. You are the most unqualified finance minister this country has ever seen, he said coldly. You're out of your depth. And the British people are drowning because of it. Reeves sat frozen, clearly rattled. Her front bench colleagues stared straight ahead, some in disbelief, others in quiet despair. The Labour front bench, usually a wall of solidarity, began to unravel, live on national television. But Farage was not content with Labour's humiliation alone. He pivoted to the Conservatives, sparing them no mercy. Fixing the Tory benches with a withering gaze, he spoke slowly and deliberately, "You let this country rot." The accusation was not shouted but whispered, and somehow that made it more damning. Turning to Robert Jenrick, he sneered at the former minister's sharp attire and carefully curated image. "Savile Row suits won't save a party that's decaying from the inside out." Laughter echoed faintly across the chamber, not the jovial, performative kind common in parliamentary debates, but something darker. It was nervous, uneasy. The laughter of those realizing they were witnessing the end of an era. Then came the moment no one could have predicted. The speaker, whose role demands impartiality and restraint, stood and addressed the chamber once again. In a voice heavy with the weight of historical significance, he acknowledged what had just occurred, a political upheaval so decisive, so undeniable, that the balance of power had been irreversibly altered. He declared Nigel Farage the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The chamber fell silent once more. Starmer, now visibly pale, tried to rise and failed. He slumped back into his seat, defeated. Around him, his allies had no words. No strategy. No defences. In that moment, the political establishment, both Labour and Conservative, appeared leaderless and adrift. Farage stood, unmoved. His expression was one of quiet resolve. There was no fist-pumping or celebration. Just clarity. This was not a victory speech, it was the declaration of a new political order. What had occurred was not just a dramatic parliamentary moment. It was a revolution. And as the chamber sat in stunned silence, one truth became increasingly apparent: the old guard, the parties, the leaders, the assumptions, had just been swept away. Britain, whether it liked it or not, was entering uncharted territory. He didn't utter another word after delivering the final blow. There was no need. As the last echoes of his thunderous address faded, Nigel Farage allowed the silence to settle, heavy and unrelenting. He stood motionless, scanning the chamber with the calm composure of a general surveying the battlefield after victory. The impact of what had just transpired was unmistakable. The long-held illusion that Labour and the Conservatives were the only viable options in British politics had been shattered, and everyone present knew it. Farage had not appealed to anger or tribalism. He had appealed to truth, or at least, a version of it that resonated with millions. His words were directed not just at the political elite before him, but at the people who had, for years, felt ignored, belittled, and spoken down to by those in power. It was not merely a speech, it was a reckoning, and not just for Labour, but for the Tories as well. The Conservative benches were eerily silent. They had not been spared the wrath of Farage's critique. They had been dismantled with the same clinical precision. Their record laid bare. Their aspirations mocked. Their future questioned. The message could not have been clearer: if Labour was weak, the Conservatives were irrelevant. Then came reports from inside Number 10. Starmer, having been escorted from the chamber in the immediate aftermath, was said to have locked himself inside his office. According to an aide, he had murmured, almost inaudibly, "It's over, isn't it?" There was no reply. By the time the evening bulletins aired, the country had already made up its mind. Every major broadcaster led with the same story: Farage destroys Starmer. Clips of the speech went viral. By nightfall, flash polls showed Reform UK soaring past both Labour and the Conservatives, leaving the traditional parties reeling. In Parliament, as cameras were being packed away and MPs shuffled about in a daze, Farage made one final remark. Turning to the Speaker, he said quietly but deliberately, "The people have waited long enough." With that, he exited the chamber, slow, steady, flanked by Reform UK MPs who looked more like a government in waiting than a protest faction. He didn't need to say anything else. His presence alone had said it all. Across the country, the response was electric. In cafes, pubs, living rooms, and factory canteens, people didn't just watch politics, they felt it shift. Conversations echoed with a single refrain: "Did you see that speech?" It was as if the nation had collectively witnessed something historic, not a moment in politics, but a turning point in British democracy. Within Labour, chaos erupted. Leaks flooded the press. Backbenchers began plotting in plain sight. Even Starmer's inner circle fell into silence. Whispers of resignation, collapse, and emergency leadership discussions filled the corridors of Westminster. And yet, the Tories, who might once have capitalized gleefully on Labour's pain, said nothing. Their silence wasn't tactical. It was terrified. What Farage had delivered was not merely a rousing critique. It was a eulogy and obituary for a political era. The establishment, as it had existed for decades, had been declared dead on arrival. Downing Street had become a fortress of denial. The Prime Minister disappeared from public view. All scheduled media appearances were abruptly cancelled. Press were barred from asking questions. Leaked internal memos revealed desperate pleas for Labour MPs to rally behind their embattled leader. But even these memos were being leaked within minutes of being written. A press briefing planned for the next morning collapsed in farce. Starmer, it was said, refused to leave his office. Rumours swirled that senior civil servants had begun drafting contingency plans for a leadership transition. But it was already too late. The mood of the country had turned. Labour was a sinking vessel. Its captain had abandoned the helm. Meanwhile, Farage's shadow loomed large over every network. Every major broadcaster requested interviews. Every newspaper sought a quote. But Farage remained measured. There was no gloating. No jubilant tour of the studios. He understood the power of restraint. Outside Parliament, he made a single, cutting statement. The British people have waited long enough. Now it's time for real leadership. 5 words that cut through the noise like a blade. It was not triumphalism. It was a signal. Inside Parliament, stunned MPs sat in hollow silence. One Tory MP was overheard whispering to a colleague, "That wasn't a speech, it was an execution." And the corpse, many noted grimly, still lay across the front bench. Commentators scrambled to contextualize what they had just witnessed. Farage, long dismissed by many in Westminster as a fringe agitator, had just torn through the core of Britain's political class with surgical force. His address was not a manifesto. It was an autopsy. Not a proposal for incremental reform, but a final verdict on a broken system. Across the nation, the response intensified. From the red wall towns that had once given Labour their heartlands, to Tory rural seats that had grown tired of broken pledges, voters flooded call-in shows and social media with a singular demand: real change. Not another reshuffle. Not another vacuous slogan. They wanted truth. They wanted delivery. And again, one name surged to the top of every discussion: Farage. He had said aloud what millions had felt for years, that the ruling parties had failed, and that the politics of managed decline had to end. That British democracy needed more than image consultants, sound bites, and spin doctors. It needed a reckoning. And now, it had won. Even abroad, headlines mirrored the astonishment. From Washington to Brussels, foreign newspapers reported with barely veiled awe at the upheaval in British politics. The man who had once been caricatured as a provocateur on the sidelines had just become the centre of gravity in Westminster.